So welcome everybody to our podcast series, Leading in a Climate Changed World. Today it is a great pleasure to be interviewing Kosha Joubert. Kosha serves as CEO of the global Ecovillage network, also known as GEN. She has worked extensively in the fields of community empowerment, intercultural collaboration, and the emergence of collective wisdom. Kosha is a co-founder of Gaia Education, which develops trainings at the cutting edge of sustainability, and co-author of the internationally applied curriculum of the Ecovillage Design Education. She is also the author of a book on collective wisdom and editor of books on social tools for building community and ecovillage solutions. Kosha grew up in South Africa under apartheid and has been dedicated to the healing of divides and of collective trauma ever since. She received the Daddy Janki Award, 100 Women of Spirit, for engaging spirituality in life and work and for making a difference in the world. In 2019, she hosted the Power of Community online summit, which attracted more than 10,000 participants. And in February 2020, we'll follow this up with a second summit dedicated to Communities for Future, exploring our response to the climate emergency. And finally, she's just back from the UN Climate Conference COP25 in Madrid, where she has been signing agreements to implement ecovillage development programs with governments from the Gambia, Sierra Leone, Sudan, Liberia, Togo, and Burkina Faso. So big welcome to you today, Kosha.
Thank you, Robin. Lovely to be here with you.
And maybe you could start, because you, as we know from the bio that I just read, you do a lot of work around ecovillages. Maybe for those people who are not familiar with what an ecovillage is, you could just start with a brief description of what that is and why it's your focus around sustainable development.
Yeah, I mean, the Global Ecovillage Network was set up in 1995, really to bring together a network of projects on the ground that are started by community leaders, local leaders on the ground who had realized very early on from probably a whole array of inspirations, but many of them in the 70s and 80s when the first reports came out about the dire situation of the planet. Limits to Growth from the Club of Rome, which I think was published in 1978, and really brought present that we need to change our lifestyles. And the way that mainstream was going was not going to be future-proof. And people started realizing that this was serious, and they became serious about creating alternative pathways and really designing these. And some of the early hippie communities were part of this. You know, it was as my friend Albert Bates, who's a co-founder of the farm in the USA, likes to say, actually the word hippie comes from Wolof in Senegal and was introduced into the jazz scene in the USA from the Wolof language. And there it means those with their eyes wide open, those that wake up early and are awake. So hip, you know, hip music, hip hop music, and the hippie movement all come from the same word. And, you know, sometimes we like to re-own these words. So speaking about the hippie communities as awakening communities, they're also a part of this movement. They have evolved and matured. But today, ecovillages are much more mainstream. We have traditional villages transitioning into ecovillages, intentional communities. And the short definition includes three main aspects, which is they're participatory, so they're designed by the people for the community. They include all four areas of regeneration: social, culture, ecology, and economy. And we speak about regeneration. They regenerate the systems that they are a part of. They bring life back. That's the short description.
Yeah, fantastic. And thank you for the etymology of the word hippie. I wasn't aware of that. So maybe we can bridge that into leadership, because you said it's often from leaders in communities who see that something is necessary. And as you know, this series is about leading in a climate changed world. How are you experiencing the marriage also of the kind of top-down solutions? You've just been at COP25 signing lots of agreements with governments, so I guess want to do kind of top-down solutions, and you also do a lot of bottom-up grassroots work. How are you experiencing the balance between the two and the kind of leadership that is inspiring you at the moment?
Yeah, Yeah, you know, I feel that what science is telling us is that at this time it's already too late, right? That's what science and the International Panel for Climate Change, if we take them seriously and then add to them the reports that are actually coming in, it's too late. So as my friend Danielle Val says, we have to do the impossible because we cannot bear to accept the probable, or as Charles Eisenstein says, we have to cultivate the power of miracle. We have to learn the ingredients of miracles again. And I think that miracles are actually more and more proven by modern science and modern physics in that the actions that we take are not just, this is not a step-by-step approach that we're following, but we're working in nested realities where when I come completely 100% present in the current moment, and I find the response that is the true response to this particular moment, breaking through old patterns that are not conducive to regenerating life, and completely creating the patterns that are conducing to supporting life, I create a new reality that goes beyond my immediate visible circle of influence. So assuming that we are connected to each other and to the world around us in ways that are not yet fully understood by us rationally, but that people have felt in ancient cultures through times, we know that our influence can go beyond what we immediately recognize rationally. That's what I'm trying to say. So for me, the interesting thing is that leadership currently, in my eyes, can come from anywhere. And I think Greta has been a shining example for that, from a young girl with issues, you could say, sitting in front of a school in Sweden to Times Person of the Year 2019. I just met her at COP, and it was, I think what many people have been saying, it was truly worrying to see this small girl of 16 years old huddling away in her anorak, trying to pull it down over her face, really with an onslaught of media attention. This is what happens. Yeah, our media singles out individuals, and there's some issues I think that our media also creates around that. But it shows that leadership can come from anywhere, and I see that leadership currently comes from all those places where people dedicate themselves to stepping out of their comfort zones, coming truly present, listening deeply to the systems that we are a part of, and being dedicated to searching out those patterns and responses that are conducive to life, put into a nutshell. And whether that comes from the grassroots or from the top people in power, the 1%, I don't care. I think the most exciting thing is that sometimes we can recognize each other across the sectors of society. And suddenly those divides, I'm the Minister of Environment and I am a nobody from the grassroots in the Gambia. It suddenly doesn't matter because there's a recognition of dignity, of human dignity and presence, and heart presence that cuts across these divides, where actually the president or the Minister of Environment has a moment of true relaxation and happiness in recognizing a person who actually wants to support. Yeah,
I noted that's beautiful. And I really like your definition also of leadership and what's required, some of the qualities that are required in the leaders that we need at the moment. And I noticed that when I read out the number of agreements you've just signed at COP25, they're all in African countries. And the examples you've just given about ministers meeting people from the grassroots and smiling and relaxing and respecting each other are from an African context. And I wonder if you could speak a bit about how you've experienced the differences and maybe also the similarities on the different continents that you work in, particularly around leadership, recognizing each other, power differentials. Is it different in the Western world or in the global North than the African countries that you engage with, for example?
Well, I guess that I have, I've been very touched, like some of the countries that I've just named, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Sudan, they all come out of very, very painful, deep civil wars that were so, I could also name Rwanda. We're about to sign a partnership with Rwanda, and they've also taken on the inspiration of the Ecovillage network and have started what they call the Green Village movement. So we're also partnering in Rwanda, just as another example. So the countries that are most confronted with their own vulnerability are the countries that are most open to collaborating with their own civil society and are realizing that they have to build on the intelligence and wisdom of their own people, and that fall back on the power of women who carry community and care for children, that fall back also on the intelligentsia, on the intellectuals of the country, and say, we need to work with you. And the countries where economic power is more of a driving force, I'm speaking this out, but this is my my distrust, you could say. But I find that countries where the economic drivers of big companies are more part of the driving force behind the political scene, it is much harder for those voices in governments that would really love to work with civil society to come through. And I want to name, in 2017, there was a very brilliant EU research project called TESS, T-E-S-S, that people could search that out, that actually showed the power of community-led transformation, even for the EU. That if only, don't beat me up if I get the numbers wrong here, but they showed, one of the quotes is if only 5% of the EU would engage in community-led transformation, and this is transition town initiatives, eco-village development, permaculture, urban gardens, all of this kind of stuff, it would suffice for 80 or 90% of the EU to reach their carbon emission reduction goals by 2020. This was in 2017. So research is already showing that community-led change that comes bottom up, is incredibly effective. There's also research around the frequency of replication that happens by itself without, this doesn't need huge sums of money thrown at it. The effect is huge, so why is this not on the front of implementation as we speak about the climate agreements and climate action implementation and ramping up climate action,
And why isn't it? In your experience, you're saying you think it's partly because there's a corporate power block that is getting in the way of that? Is that your experience? Or what other reasons would you say? We're also wondering about the absence of political leadership to drive this. What would you say are the factors that stop what seems to be a very obvious way of helping governments meet the targets of the Paris Climate Agreement?
Yeah, I mean, if we go back to, the ecocide laws and the work that Polly Higgins was doing before she passed last year on Easter Sunday, which was to mainly bring the oil companies to the Hague International Tribunal. And
just to say that work, of course, is still continuing with Jojo and other people in that movement.
Absolutely. But still, I just want to honor Polly Higgins here for a moment. And, you know, really bringing present the amount of destructive influence that the oil industry has spread through their advertisement influencing of scientific publications, etc. And this is being continued by other companies. So I just don't want to play that down. I know it's uncomfortable to speak to that. And from what I see also in Africa, it's a huge force. And part of my my pain also in coming back from COP25 now is that the whole discussion about carbon trade, carbon emission trade is sidetracking a lot of the energy into pathways that are not very effective in implementing real change on the ground. And when I travel to Africa and see how trees are being planted on thousands of hectares along highways with no one that will actually caretake these trees, while trees are being cut down and shipped out of the country faster than you can count them at the same time, you know, that there is a real there is confusion about how to actually implement, and also a lot of the green climate funds are dribbling down very, very slowly and never reach the ground. This is very worrying. It's very worrying if we actually want to, if our intention is to safeguard this planet for future generations. So I want to take this seriously and also call on all the companies to ensure that they invest in, and I know this is happening more and more, in campaigns, corporate social responsibility that really supports the work on the ground. And also with their products, make sure that they produce the products that are needed for the future. Yeah, and maybe you just repeat your question, because I'm very aware that I've
No, that's great. I think you're taking us in. Well, I was asking you what were the blocks to implementing these kind of grassroots strategies. I think you've spoken very clearly about that. And I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier when you were talking about the African countries that are coming forward to say we want these bottom-up solutions. And you said they come from more vulnerable spaces, from civil war or from conflict or from challenges. And if we now focus more into, or continue to focus into, the leadership question, do you think it is important for, or what is the role of vulnerability in leadership? Like we talked about it on a nation level, or you've mentioned it on a national level. I'm curious about the qualities of leadership that are needed to feel the intensity of the call now. And I'm thinking about vulnerability, and I'm also thinking about spirituality. Also, in the bio I read, you've been awarded an award for bringing spirituality into life. So is it important for leaders to have a spiritual sense? Is it important for them to be vulnerable?
Beautiful. Let me just come back to the blocks for one more moment, because I feel I just want to name two more. So one, I believe, is the block of conversation circles. What is a true participatory democracy? How do we allow our leaders to actually listen to the voices from the ground? Where at the moment, I feel like there's a lot of interference between the real voices from the ground and our political leaders, and a lot more direct conversations like we've seen in Ireland and also in Germany, actually, would be really important, I feel, to allow citizens' voices to come through more directly.
Are you talking about things like citizens' assemblies?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. And the other block, I think, is self-confidence in grassroots networks and capacity building. So many of the people doing the good work on the ground have done so irrespective of what the leading class or the government is doing. And to learn that actually this is a time where the game has completely changed. You know, we're all in one boat here, and governments there are those good elements in governments everywhere, maybe not everywhere, but, you know, I would say everywhere, that we can seek out, that have stepped into politics not for their own aggrandissement, but really for their people, for their love of their countries, and are willing to work together, and that we can find them, and that we can find the words, that we need to also learn how to use the words that bridge the gap between us. So I think capacity building, self-worth increase of the grassroots networks, and making spaces and channels for the voices to be heard is of highest importance.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So now we come back to this
yes,
question about,
your question.
These two qualities, like vulnerability and spirituality. How important are these for leaders, would you say?
Yeah, I think that we're still, as we step into leadership in the world, you know, and I have a very, very small sense of this as CEO of the Global Ecovillage Network, we are, you know, our networks, our countries expect us to be strong leaders. And unfortunately, we can see that in times of trouble like we are in, it seems like ridiculously bolstered up strong male leaders, you know, are on the rise again, you know. So people are still look for the strength and invulnerability in leadership. And it's a big thing to become vulnerable and show vulnerability in those places. It's a real edge. It takes great courage. Yeah. And I think for the true leadership that we need, there is no other way but to start feeling into our vulnerability. Because from a place of invulnerability, we can only do that, feel invulnerable, if we run the patterns that we are used to. It's in our habits that we feel comfortable and invulnerable. And as soon as we become serious about understanding that the very habits in our DNA, in our cultural DNA also, are what have brought us to this point, you know, like Einstein said, I'm sorry for repeating this quote that we know so well, we cannot change the systems that we are a part of from the same awareness or same consciousness that created them. We need to deeply change, and we can only do that if we allow for that moment of vulnerability to really arise. And in my personal experience, again, speaking from my personal experience, as soon as we are in leadership positions, and even long before, the busyness of modern life, the huge increase of information through flow, the increase of the complexity that we are invited to see on a daily basis and contend with, is of such a nature that if we do not insert silence and practice into our everyday life, I don't think that we can find a way to bring enough space in order to be able to see with enough witnessing quality to actually not just repeat the patterns of yesterday. So one of the little stories that have inspired me most for, I don't know, probably the past 20 years is the story about Gandhi, when he was asked by a journalist about how he deals with the complexity of his everyday life. I'm telling the story in my words now, you know, I think I was told the story by someone and I never read the original story, but he was asked by a journalist about how he deals with it. And he said, well, I meditate an hour a day, you know, and I've been meditating an hour a day for the past, I think, 7 years. And then he was asked by the same journalist, yeah, but what do you do when life becomes so busy that you just don't find the time to meditate an hour a day? And he said, well, then I get up earlier and I meditate 2 hours a day. And I've really taken that with me, and it's been a guidance in my life. And I actually do that. So when I get so stressed out that I wake up at 3 worrying, I know the time is there, and I often sit up at 3 o'clock at night and meditate 1.5 hours, because I need to find back to a space in the midst of the busyness before I start my day. And otherwise, I know that I will bring my anxiety to my team, to the conversations I have. And it's because it's like, that center of presence, it feels like very small doors that could have opened, close instead when I bring my anxiety to them. And it does feel like magic or miracle.
So that sounds wonderful. And I'm curious what you would suggest to people who don't have a meditation practice, who don't meditate for an hour. For an hour seems like a lifetime. 5 minutes is maybe a long time for people to be still. So maybe we can broaden this a little bit into this question of consciousness, which you mentioned earlier. Like in your experience, and if you were to be offering a leadership training, let's say, and you feel one of the things we need to do is bring people to the next level of consciousness or to transcend the paradigms that they're currently working within, what kind of practices might you surface that would support people to do that? You've talked about shedding some of the habits of the past, but of course that's much easier said than done. So what would you start to bring forward as possibilities for practice?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that at the heart of it, it's a shift from, firstly, is the realization that there is a difference between being in an anxiety or witnessing my anxiety. And that whenever I feel intense stress in my body, it means I am in it. And we all suffer from that when we're in leadership positions. It doesn't matter where we work. But we suffer from the stress of deadlines, our team staff requiring more guidance from us, coming back with difficult feedback, things not moving forward the way we would like to see it. There's stress that easily comes up. And the moment stress comes up, we know that we have lost the larger perspective and we are less effective in our work. And in that moment, we can choose to continue working, or we can choose to take a moment to regain perspective. And, there's lots of different techniques. I think the internet is great in many ways. And one thing is it can offer us beautiful guidance. There's wonderful apps for the phones that we can use. And I think it's up to each of us to find, what is the best way for you. I've found that for me, it really helps to have beautiful plants around me, house plants. I love my plants. Come from a family of botanists and biologists, and I love plants. So when I get stressed out, I sometimes do something as simple as look at the beautiful shape of a leaf and just for a moment, look at the miracle of nature, which is right here in my room with me, growing away. Or the beauty of a flower, and this is different for each person. Like, what is it that helps you come back to yourself? And, that helps me come back to my breath and come back to a grounding. And it's often just a 2-minute quiet. I watched you just before you started the interview, just take a moment of inner silence before you set out into the interview. It just takes a moment. So we can insert those small awarenesses into our day. In the end, I do think that we need to insert moments of quiet where we allow ourselves to digest what happens, because what has been happening, because otherwise it clogs up our nervous system. Our nervous system, I feel, is, in a way, it's our most precious instrument in this world. And I think we're nowhere close. Even I'm fascinated with current neuroscience and all the research that is being done. But I think, just to for a moment, give attention to our nervous system and acknowledge this is an instrument we have only just started to explore. And it's the finest instrument we work with and work through in our work in the world.
I'm just wondering, as you're talking, maybe you could just guide us now in like 2 minutes of kind of reflection, witnessing what you've just described, so that we get a felt experience of what you're talking about. Would you do that?
Yeah, okay. If this is what your podcast hearers would like, I mean,
think it
I'm
would be very
happy.
lovely just to have a couple of minutes of quiet, and you can just guide us into how we might do this. Because for some people, this is second nature. For some people, it might feel like a very strange thing to do.
Yeah, so I invite you right now. You can keep your eyes open, especially maybe you're driving while you're listening to this. So, you know, this is not about opening or closing your eyes. But just take a moment. I find the easiest for me, like, again, I don't know whether you have plants around you anywhere right now, but maybe the easiest would be to just connect to your breath, because that we always carry with us. And just notice for a moment this quiet stream of energy flowing out and flowing in. And notice how deeply you can feel the breath landing in your body. As you breathe in, can you feel the breath itself expanding your lungs, your belly, but also the oxygen that comes through entering your cells, first your bloodstream, then your cells. Throughout your body. Yeah, maybe you can also take a moment to notice the out breath flowing back out into the world. Entering the space around you, the air. Entering a deep, deep intimacy with all that is around you. It's a very simple way of deepening our connectedness, our awareness of our connectedness to the world. And I would also invite us to just for a moment feel our hearts and notice which feeling, emotion, which emotion is most alive in you. Because sometimes when we're so busy, we lose the connection to the finer vibrations of sadness, hope, joy, fear, anger, love that might be running through us. And this is very much the spice of our life, the juiciness between us. Life can become quite dry when we don't allow the compassionate level of also giving space to our emotions. And then we can come back to our minds and just notice whether there's maybe more spaciousness in our mind now after these few moments spent in a different way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very simple practice, but it radically transforms both the conversation and the space between us, and also what's happening inside me, for sure. I feel much more relaxed, open, spacious now than I did 5 minutes ago or 2 minutes ago. So thank you for guiding us through that. And it brings me to this question around, so this is in a way witnessing. You used the word witnessing earlier. And then I want to also delve into two topics before we close. One is coming back to this question of consciousness. So is this witnessing practice part of what helps to build the bridge to another level of consciousness? And if not, how do we do what Einstein says? How do we operate from a higher level of consciousness to look at the existing challenges that we face? Maybe let's just start with that question, and I have one more to close with.
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, I believe that our nervous systems are the refined tool. You know, our whole bodies are exquisite tools that we bring into this world. And we don't know them yet. We don't work with them with care and understanding. So, you know, climate change is an issue of not finding the right response, not finding our right. In my eyes, climate change is one result of human beings not being healed, not unfolding our potential, but living in cultures and coming from lineages that have been deeply traumatized, whether as perpetrators or victims, and nervous systems that are carrying the scars of that trauma and are therefore not able to sensitively listen to and respond to the feedback from life, the world, the living systems that we are a part of. I have a deep inner belief that if we were to listen, be able to listen well, we would find the right response. And I believe that each of us has a heart's intent why we are here, an innate purpose and an inner compass. And I'm delighted, you know, because this is like, I would say my biggest treasure in life is that my inner compass is awake, and came awake, I think, through the hardship also. You know, and it's ridiculous if I speak of hardship as a white Afrikaner growing up under apartheid. But, you know, it brought it online, and it brought me into doing things that took a lot of courage for me, and that brought me into my life's journey. So I think this listening to the inner guidance and to this fine feedback that our nervous system gives us, and when we do that, it tells us what to do, what is the next step for us. And it's never about 10 years or 20 years ahead. It's always about the next step. And it always takes courage, because it will always take us beyond what is comfortable right now. So that is, you know, the moment we relax, we become more able to listen to ourselves, and more opportunities arise. And for me, it's been amazing in these conversations, both within countries that I've traveled to and spoken to ministries, and at COP, where I speak to people from governments. It's not something that I ever expected doing. And to find suddenly in conversations, I sometimes use this image, maybe it's a strange one, but it's like I expect things to be incredibly bureaucratic and difficult. And instead the experience is like of a knife slicing through soft butter. And it's just like, you know, doors just open, and there's a resonance, and the resonance is felt, and a new opportunity arises where there was no door even before. Nobody knew there was a door, but a new reality unfolds. That to me is a miracle. And it opens up in unforeseen places through deep connectedness, when unforeseen connections are made. And it's as if a potential that has always been there in the field, and that is just waiting to be birthed into the seen reality, bursts through. And we're just the instruments. It's not, we didn't create this, you know, it's something, it was already there. It was ready to be birthed. And we are just the instruments opening the door. And that's why it feels like a miracle, you know? Yeah, and that's the new consciousness. So that's why how we create a planet that becomes bigger than the planet we currently think of. is the reality. You know, it's like reality changes. That's also why I have a question mark to the planetary boundaries.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I guess that's also where hope begins in a way. But
Yeah.
I want to just, the last question I had is something you just started to refer to, which is about the nature of trauma and collective trauma. I also know that you work in this field. And how important is it for leaders to be trauma informed?
I mean, the word trauma is like a new word, right? So I believe that no true leaders could be true leaders if they were not trauma informed, whether they use that word or not. And you know, I've been working in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, in China, in Europe, and you know, I see that the kind of leaders that are emerging are, you know, they have very different cultural mannerisms, you could say, you know, like the Latin American fiery protest kind of. It's like a fiery, earthy. It's very different from the African. Which is, I don't want to put flat words on this actually, so I won't continue this line of speaking. But to me, it's part of the beauty that leadership expresses itself in culturally appropriate ways in different cultures. And that includes also the response to the trauma that the particular cultural field carries, which makes the leadership particular. It needs to be particular to the cultural field. So leadership in Germany at this point in time is very different from leadership in Sierra Leone or leadership in China or in Sri Lanka. You know, it's different because it speaks from and to the cultural wound that place carries and people carry. So I would say in the depth of leadership, true leadership is compassion, which means that we are able to listen to the field such that we are able to respond adequately to the life systems that we are a part of. And that includes trauma awareness. And yeah, I love, you know, we were also both just part of the Collective Trauma Summit that was hosted by Thomas Hübel and drew, I think, 52,000 participants from 176 countries. So very aware of the interest that this topic is attracting. And I think, again, you know, that conversation alerts us to the fact that the very nature of trauma is that we are swimming in it. Therefore, we cannot see our own cultural trauma. And I think that's the same with, you know, the question around Einstein and the shifting consciousness. We are swimming in the current consciousness, so we cannot see the next level of consciousness, which is why the witnessing and the listening becomes so crucial, and also the increase of complexity, which allows us, because it's on the edges, right? Permaculture has this beautiful concept that life is most thriving on the edges, you know, edge awareness. So everywhere on the edges, and this has always been my my fuel, you could say, is traveling between cultures, listening deeply to the cultural fields that I enter, traveling in between sectors of society and listening deeply when I'm on that edge. I think it's the most exciting place, because that's where the new is able to enter my system and where freshness comes in. So it's there in my meditation when I listen to universal intelligence. It's there in my conversation when I have conversations with people that are doing something completely and utterly different from me. Yeah, and I think the one thing that is currently often missing is listening to the people on the ground. So I just want to bring that voice in, because that is what I also stand for, is the people on the ground who are actually experiencing climate change right now. The people in Zimbabwe who are experiencing another drought, my friends at the Permaculture Institute whose plants have shriveled in the last drought, the people in Malawi who experienced the floods, the people in Sri Lanka who've experienced the bombings and the destruction of community fabric. It's these voices need to be more directly heard and felt so that the compassion in us can awaken to find the right response. And yeah, I think that's important. So maybe I can propose a few more leaders for your podcast series.
Please do.
From those kind of places.
Absolutely, we'd be delighted. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I think that's a great note on which to close, actually, because we definitely also want to broaden the range of speakers that we have in the podcast series. And I just want to also really acknowledge and appreciate and applaud the work that you do to bring those voices, not just the voices, but also the action, the development, the hope that you can catalyze in some of the communities that you work in. Thank you for the time you've spent with us today. It feels like it's been both broad and deep at the same time. You've touched on many different areas. And I want to wish you every success in your work for Jen, for the Global Ecovillage Network, with the online summit that's coming next February, for the global reach of the consciousness that you're also seeking to develop. So wishing you every success into the future. And thank you so much for your time today, Kosha.
Thank you, Robin. And maybe just as one last comment, because I know, usually people think that these small local solutions are so small, and just to say clearly that Jen now reaches out to more than 6,000 communities in we know it's more than 10,000, but 6,000 we can actually show the communities in more than 114 countries. Small solutions everywhere do create a new tapestry as well. So yeah, thank you very much for this space. Thank you everyone who's been listening.